The snow in the Frostfang Mountains wasn't gentle. It was an assault. It screamed down from iron-gray skies, a horizontal blizzard of ice that scoured the stone peaks clean. A solitary figure moved through this white fury, a smudge of gray against the endless pale. Her name was Celine. At 22, hardship had aged her, carving hollows beneath her cheekbones and painting permanent weariness in her stormy eyes. To the world, she was a ghost, a mute, a dullard, a human girl with no past, no voice, and no future worth mentioning. But beneath her skin, a legend paced, a creature of moon-pale fur and silent wrath, known in terrified whispers, the ghost wolf, an omen of death. If anyone discovered her true nature, a swift death would be a mercy. She'd be hunted, dissected, her pelt made into a trophy. She had been running since she was 12. Now, she was just tired. Ahead, looming from the cliff's edge like a broken tooth, stood the Onyx Citadel. Its black stone walls drank the weak daylight. This was the fortress of the cursed Alpha, Kalen Thorn. Rumors swirled like the snow. He tore the throats from guards who breathed too loudly. He hadn't slept soundly in 3 years. His madness was a living thing that stalked the halls beside him. Celine didn't care about rumors. Her eyes were locked on the notice nailed to the village post she'd passed, the paper frayed and frozen. Help wanted. Citadel scullery maid. Room and board, no questions asked. For most, it was a death sentence. For the ghost wolf, it was the perfect shadow to hide in. Who would ever look for a legend scrubbing pots in a madman's kitchen? She reached the gargantuan iron gates, her threadbare pack a meager weight. A guard emerged from a stone box, his form massive, his scent an aggressive wave of pine and cold steel. "Lost, little mouse?" he sneered, his breath fogging. Celine shook her head, mute. She pulled the crumpled notice from her pocket, holding it up with fingers blue from cold. The guard barked a laugh. "You want inside? You look like a strong wind would snap you in two." She kept her eyes lowered, the picture of pathetic submission. Then she pointed to her throat, shaking her head again. "Mute, huh?" His mockery shifted into something colder, pity laced with grim amusement. "Might be what saves your life. The Alpha hates noise, can't stand chatter." He shrugged, hitting a lever. The gate groaned open just enough. "Kitchen entrance. Ask for Hilda. And girl, keep your head down. If you see the Alpha, don't you dare look him in the eye." The kitchen was a cavern of chaos, steaming with the smells of burnt stew and fear. Hilda was a mountain of a woman, her face a road map of stern lines. She looked Celine up and down with a critical eye. "Scrawny," she grunted, "but your hands look like they know work. And you're quiet?" Celine nodded. "Good. Last girl wouldn't shut her trap. The Alpha threw a cast iron pot through the window. You start now. Scour the grease traps, then the west corridor." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "But you listen sharp. Never, never go to the east wing. That's his territory. You hear him coming, you find a cupboard, and you don't breathe." Celine nodded again, a perfect portrait of obedient fear. She spent the next 6 hours in a fog of steam and grime, her hands moving automatically. The numbing work was a blessing. It quieted her mind. But her wolf was a restless storm inside her ribcage. "Danger," it whispered, a constant prickle at the base of her skull. "He is near." It was late, the citadel sunk into a deep, watchful silence when she was sent to polish the flagstones in the main corridor. The only sounds were the whisper of her cloth and the distant moan of wind through arrow slits. Then she smelled it. Storm clouds, ozone, and the sharp metallic tang of fresh blood. A scent of such raw, dominant power, it made her human knees tremble. The door at the hall's end crashed open. Heavy, stumbling footsteps, a low, pained growl that vibrated in the stone beneath her hands. Celine scrambled back, pressing herself into a shallow alcove behind a tapestry. She peered out, her heart a frantic drum. Alpha Kalen. He was shirtless in the frigid draft, his body a canvas of old scars and tense, sweat-slicked muscle. His black hair was wild, falling across a face twisted not in anger, but in agony. And his eyes, they burned a violent, unnatural crimson, the sign of a wolf teetering on the razor's edge of sanity. "Make it stop," he rasped, clawing at his own temples. "Just make it stop." He wasn't speaking to her, he was begging the ghosts in his own mind. He stumbled, his shoulder connecting with a small side table, a porcelain figurine shattered. The sound seemed to lash him. He roared, a sound of pure, frustrated torment, and drove his fist into the stone wall. Celine heard the sickening crunch of knuckles, saw the dark splash of blood against the gray rock. She held her breath. Her wolf was howling inside her, not in fear, but in a desperate answering pain. "Mate, he is hurting. He is ours." Celine's blood turned to ice. No, fate could not be this cruel. Her destined mate could not be the cursed mad king who would slaughter her the moment he saw her true form. Kalen slumped against the bloody wall, sliding down to sit on the cold floor. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking, not with rage, but with utter exhaustion. He looked shattered. Every instinct told her to run, to stay hidden, but the pull, it was a physical ache, a hook in her soul. Without conscious thought, she stepped out of the alcove. She didn't approach. She simply stood there, letting her presence, the quiet, calming aura she had learned to project, radiate into the space. It was a small magic, a whisper of peace. Kalen's head snapped up. Those crimson eyes locked on her. He stared, nostrils flaring as he drew in a ragged breath. "Who?" he growled, voice raw. "Who is there?" Celine didn't move. She dipped into a shallow curtsy, eyes fixed on his bloodied boots. He tried to push himself up, but his body failed him. "You," he whispered, confusion cutting through the madness. "You're quiet. The noise, it fades near you." He didn't stand. He crawled towards her, a powerful predator brought to his knees. He stopped just inches from her feet. His hand, streaked with blood, came up and gently, almost hesitantly, gripped the coarse fabric of her skirt hem, not to pull or demand, just to hold on. "Don't go," he pleaded, the words torn from a profound loneliness. "Please. The noises, they're quiet when you're here." Then, for the first time in 3 tortured years, Alpha Kalen's eyes fluttered closed. The tension bled from his frame. He slumped forward, his forehead coming to rest on her knees, and fell into a deep, unconscious sleep. Celine stood frozen. The Mad King collapsed at her feet, his bloody hand clutching her skirt like a lifeline. Celine stared at the unconscious Alpha, his weight leaning against her legs. Her wolf whined with concern, urging her to comfort him, but survival screamed at her to flee, to let the guards find him and face the consequences. She was a phantom here. She had to remain one. Yet, looking at his face, now smoothed of its torment and sleep, she couldn't. He seemed younger, the harsh lines of pain erased. With a resigned sigh, she knelt. She pulled a clean rag from her apron and gently wrapped his bleeding knuckles. She wiped the sweat from his brow with careful fingers. She stayed like that, a silent sentinel for nearly an hour. The profound silence of his sleep was a tangible thing in the haunted corridor. When she finally heard the rhythmic tread of the night patrol boots echoing from a connecting hall, panic surged. She couldn't be found with him. Gently, she pried his fingers from her skirt. He made a soft, distressed sound in his sleep, his hand grasping at empty air. Her heart clenched. She snatched up her cleaning bucket and fled, melting into a dark servant's passage just as two guards rounded the corner. "Alpha!" one shouted. "He's down! Fetch the healer!" From the shadows, Celine watched them lift him with reverent care. He looked strangely vulnerable in their arms. She touched a hand to her chest where a new, fragile connection now hummed, a silver thread of awareness tied to his sleeping mind. She was in unimaginable danger. The next morning, the Citadel buzzed with subdued shock. The Alpha had slept. Not a fitful doze, but 4 solid hours of deep, healing rest. It was spoken of in whispers, a miracle wrought by unknown means. But Kalen was not grateful. He was obsessed. Celine was polishing silver in the cavernous dining hall when the doors were thrown open. Kalen strode in, dressed in severe black, his presence sucking the air from the room. He looked better. The raging crimson in his eyes had dulled to a smoldering amber, but his energy was that of a predator on a fresh scent. "Line them up," he barked at Hilda, who turned pale. "Every female servant, now." Hilda stuttered. "Alpha, has something been stolen?" "Someone was in the West Hall last night," Kalen said, his gaze sweeping the room. "She had a scent, like silence, like peace. I need to find her." Terror slithered down Celine's spine. She had taken a double dose of bitter wolfsbane tea at dawn, a nauseating brew that masked her wolf signature completely. To him, she would smell of nothing but lye soap and mundane fear. The servants were herded into a trembling line. Kalen walked slowly down the row, stopping before each woman, inhaling deeply near her hair or neck. His frustration grew with each passing second. No, not her. Nothing. He stopped in front of Celine. He towered over her, a wall of tense muscle and simmering power. She kept her eyes locked on the polished toes of his boots, playing her part perfectly, a scared, simple mute. He leaned down, his breath stirring the loose hairs at her temple as he inhaled. She held her breath, her blood roaring in her ears. "Nothing," he muttered, disgusted. "Just cheap soap and dust." His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her head up. Her stormy eyes met his burning amber gaze. "Do I know you? Were you in the West Hall last night?" "She's a mute, Alpha. Couldn't answer if she wanted to, and she only cleans the lower dungeons, never goes upstairs." Kalen stared into Celine's eyes, and for one heart-stopping second, she thought he saw past the facade. The new bond between them vibrated, a warm, insistent pulse. Then his lip curled in disappointment. He released her chin with a dismissive flick. "Useless," he spat. He turned to his beta, a grim-faced man named Rylan. It wasn't a servant, it was something else. A spirit, perhaps. Or the ghost wolf, the legend. She was real. I saw a flash of white in my dream. Rylan shifted uneasily. "Alpha, the ghost wolf is a fireside tale, a myth to frighten pups." "She is real." Kalen's roar shook the chandeliers. "And she was here. She healed me. Her presence silenced the curse." He clutched at his own head, the madness flickering back. "Find her. Comb the forests. Search the mountains. If there is a white wolf in my territory, I want her found. She is the cure. She is everything." As he stormed out, Celine felt the last of her warmth drain away. He wasn't looking for a mate. He was hunting a remedy, a magical creature to be captured and used. If he discovered she was the ghost wolf, he wouldn't love her. He would leash her. The hunt for her own self had just been declared. A tense week passed. The Citadel tightened like a coiled spring. Patrols left at dawn and returned at dusk, reporting nothing but empty forests. Kalen's obsession festered. The brief peace had vanished, and the sleepless madness returned, sharpened by frustration. Because of the incident where the Alpha had miraculously slept, Hilda made a decision. "You're quiet," she told Celine one morning, her voice brooking no argument. You don't disturb the air. From now on, you clean the Alpha's private study while he's in it." It was a sentence worse than death. Every day, Celine was forced to enter the lion's den. She would dust shelves laden with ancient leather-bound books, while Kalen paced like a caged beast, muttering maps and strategies to find the white wolf. She would rebuild a fire in his hearth, while he argued with a skeptical Rylan about expanding the search. The cruel irony was, the closer she was to him, the more his symptoms eased. When she was in the room, the tremors in his hands stilled, the constant tension in his jaw relaxed, the frantic edge to his voice softened. He credited some new tonic, but Celine knew it was the bond, a fragile thread of peace she inadvertently spun just by being near. One afternoon, the strain became too much. Kalen was at his great oak desk, his head buried in his hands. 2 days without even a moment's doze. The shadows under his eyes were bruises. Celine was silently sweeping near the door, her heart a knot of pity. Just a little, she thought, against all better judgment, just a thread of comfort. She lowered her inner shields a fraction, allowing a whisper of her innate calming aura to seep into the room. Kalen went perfectly still. His head snapped up. He scanned the room, his eyes wild and searching. "Do you feel that?" he whispered to Rylan, who stood by the window. "Feel what, Alpha?" "The quiet," Kalen breathed, rising from his chair. "It's back. She's here. The ghost wolf. She's close." He rushed to the window, staring out at the snowy peaks, as if he could summon her by will. "She's watching me. I know it." Celine recoiled, yanking her aura back inside herself, becoming small and invisible once more. Kalen turned from the window, his gaze sweeping the room. It landed on her, clutching her broom like a shield. "You," he barked. Celine flinched. "Girl, did you see anything? A flash of white outside?" She shook her head frantically, her eyes wide with manufactured terror. Kalen sighed, the hope draining from his face, leaving only weary despair. "Of course not. You're just part of the furniture." He strode past her toward the door, his shoulder brushing against hers. The contact was a lightning strike. A jolt of pure energy arced between them, so potent Celine gasped soundlessly. Kalen froze mid-stride. He looked down at his arm, then back at her, a deep frown etching his brow. He stepped closer, leaning in to inhale the scent at her neck. Celine stopped breathing. The wolfsbane tea churned in her stomach. "Soap," he murmured, the word thick with disappointment. "Just cheap lavender soap." He pulled back, his expression closing off. "Get out. I need to think." Celine fled, but as the heavy door shut behind her, she heard his voice, low and desperate, carried on the still air. "Where are you?" he whispered, not to the room, but to the phantom in his mind. "I know you're here." That night, the silence of the Citadel was shattered, not by the Alpha's madness, but by the slick, professional silence of an assassin's blade. Celine was in the scullery, elbow deep in greasy water, when she smelled them. Not wolves, not pack. This was the scent of poison, cold steel, and disciplined intent to kill. The northern clans, tired of the volatile mad king on their border, had sent their best, the Shadow Walkers. The alarm bell never sounded. They had already silenced the guards on the outer wall. They were inside, a phantom death moving with lethal purpose straight toward the Alpha's bedchamber. Kalen was exhausted, his senses dulled by the curse. He wouldn't wake until the dagger was at his throat. Celine dropped her scrub brush. The water sloshed over the floor. A choice, stark and immediate, cleaved her mind in two. Stay safe, stay hidden, let her mate die, or reveal the monster she was and lose everything. There was no choice at all. She ran for the back courtyard door, tearing at the simple ties of her dress as she went. She burst into the frozen night, the cold a slap against her skin. Shift, she commanded her body, the words a silent roar in her soul. Now. Agony and ecstasy, a cracking of bones, a surge of power held in check for a decade. Where a small, mute woman stood, a creature of legend now crouched, a wolf of impossible size, her fur the pure, blinding white of a snowfield under a full moon. Her eyes glowed like liquid mercury. She didn't howl, she moved. In one powerful leap, she scaled the sheer citadel wall, her claws finding purchase on ice-slick stone. She was a streak of pale light against the black rock, flowing up to the Alpha's balcony just as the glass doors exploded inward. The world dissolved into shards of glass and shouts. 3 figures clad in matte black leather, shadow walkers, poured through the ruined balcony doors. Kalen was already rolling from his bed, a sword in his hand, but his movements were sluggish, betrayed by bone-deep exhaustion. He parried the first dagger thrust, steel ringing. The second assassin swept his legs. Kalen hit the stone floor hard, the breath knocked from him. The third stood over him, a thin, cruel blade poised for a killing strike to the heart. Kalen looked up, not at the blade, but past it. In that final second, a strange calm settled over him. At least the noise will end. Then, a blur of white, moving faster than thought. A force like a falling star hit the assassin. The sound of breaking bones was horribly loud. The man was lifted and thrown across the room like a child's doll, crumpling against the far wall. Kalen pushed himself up on his elbows, staring. The creature standing between him and death was magnificent. A wolf, but like no wolf he had ever seen. She was larger than any alpha, her form muscular and built for lethal grace. Her pelt was a radiant, impossible white, seeming to glow with its own inner moonlight. And her eyes, they were molten silver, intelligent, and blazing with a protective fury so absolute it stole his breath. She stood over him, a living barrier, her lips peeled back from fangs that gleamed like polished daggers. A low, continuous growl vibrated from her chest, a sound that promised annihilation. It didn't say food or threat, it said mine. The 2 remaining assassins hesitated, their discipline warring with primal fear. The white wolf gave them no time to recover. She lunged, a streak of pale fury. Her movement was fluid, almost beautiful in its deadly efficiency. She caught one attacker's arm in her jaws. A sickening crack echoed, followed by a scream and the clatter of a falling blade. The leader, the quickest, reacted. He didn't aim for the wolf. He drew a small, wicked crossbow from his back and leveled it at Kalen's heart. No! The word wasn't spoken. It was a telepathic scream that tore through Kalen's mind, a voice of silver and storm. The white wolf moved. She didn't try to reach the assassin in time. Instead, she threw her own massive body in front of Kalen. Thwack! The bolt struck home, burying itself deep in the thick muscle of her shoulder. A sharp, pained yelp split the air, a sound of shock and agony that lanced through Kalen sharper than any blade. The wolf staggered, a bloom of shocking crimson spreading through her white fur. But she did not fall. Pain ignited her rage into an inferno. With a snarl that held the promise of torn-out throats, she launched herself, a force of nature, at the crossbowman. She drove him back, out onto the balcony, and with a final powerful surge of her hind legs, sent him sailing over the stone railing into the black, frozen void below. Silence. A heavy, ringing silence broken only by the wind howling through the shattered doors and the white wolf's ragged, wet panting. She turned her great head to look at Kalen. Blood matted her glorious fur, dripping steadily onto the stone. Her silver eyes met his, and in them he saw not just pain, but a profound, weary intelligence. "You," Kalen breathed, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "You came back." The wolf looked at him, and for a second, the bond between them, the one he hadn't understood, flared like a struck match. He felt a ghost of her pain, a surge of her fierce, protective love. It was overwhelming. "Let me help you," he whispered, struggling to his knees. But the thunder of boots and shouts of guards echoed down the corridor. The wolf's ears flicked toward the sound. She looked at the door, then back at him, her whine soft and mournful. Then, before he could speak again, she turned and leapt from the balcony, vanishing into the stormy night. "No!" Kalen's cry was raw. He stumbled to the railing, gripping the cold stone. Below, only swirling snow and darkness. But she had left evidence. On his floor, a small, growing pool of blood. Bright red. Her blood. The ghost wolf was no longer a myth. She was wounded, and he now had her scent. Agony was a white-hot brand in Celine's shoulder. The moment she landed in the deep snowdrifts below the citadel, she forced the shift. It was a nauseating, painful reversal, bones shrinking, fur receding, the world expanding to human scale. The crossbow bolt was now a grotesque wooden stalk protruding from her human flesh. She bit down on the leather strap from her ruined dress, muffling a scream. "Move, you have to move." She couldn't return to the servant quarters. The blood trail would lead right to her. Stumbling through the blizzard, she found the old, half-collapsed woodshed near the outer wall. Inside, it was frigid and stank of rot and old tools. It would have to do. With fingers clumsy from cold and pain, she reached behind, found the shaft of the bolt. Her vision swum. 1, 2. She pulled. The world went black at the edges. A choked animal sound was torn from her throat as the bolt came free with a sickening wet pull. Blood pulsed from the wound, warm and terrifying. She fumbled for the rags used to oil harnesses, pressed the filthy bundle hard against the hole, and leaned against the wall, gasping. She needed stitches, a healer, but a mute scullery maid with a crossbow wound? It was a death sentence. Gritting her teeth, she found a clay jar of foul-smelling turpentine used for cleaning. She poured it directly onto the wound. The pain was so vast, so consuming, she nearly left her body. Stars exploded behind her eyes. When she could breathe again, she bound the wound tightly with strips torn from her underskirt, then clumsily pulled her spare dress on over it. The fabric was loose, but the smell, the coppery scent of fresh blood, was potent. She grabbed handfuls of dried, dusty sage from a forgotten bundle and rubbed it over her skin, her clothes, her hair, trying to create a cloud of herbal stink to mask the truth. It wouldn't fool an alpha up close, but maybe, just maybe, it would pass for a clumsy maid who'd spilled the kitchen herbs. She slipped back into the citadel as the first gray light of dawn bled into the sky. She made it to her narrow cot in the women's dormitory and collapsed, shivering violently. She had saved him, but she was wounded, weak, and trapped in the fortress of the man now hunting her with a fanatic zeal. The citadel awoke to uproar. The assassination attempt had failed, but the appearance of the ghost wolf was all anyone could talk about. Kalen was a man possessed. He refused treatment for his own minor cuts. In the great hall, he paced before the high table, holding the bloody crossbow bolt like a sacred relic. "He was here," he told Rylan, his beta, his voice vibrating with intensity. "She took this for me. This is her blood. I want it analyzed. I want her scent isolated. I want every cave, every crevice on this mountain scoured. She's hurt. She can't have gone far." Celine kept her head down, scrubbing the flagstones in a nearby corridor. Every pass of the brush sent a jolt of fire through her shoulder. She moved stiffly, favoring her left side. "Girl." The voice, deep and commanding, froze her blood. Kalen stood in the archway of the hall, his amber eyes fixed on her. "You, the mute, come here." Celine stood slowly, clutching her bucket like a shield. She walked toward him, eyes fixed on the floor. "You clean the upper floors," he stated, though his mind was clearly elsewhere. "Did you see anything last night? Any large animal? Strange tracks? She shook her head. Useless, he muttered. Then he paused. He took a step closer, inhaling deliberately. You smell like an herb garden. Sage. Thyme. Why? Celine's mind raced. She pantomimed tripping, spilling an imaginary jar, then pointed to her clothes. Kalen's frown deepened. He seemed too distracted for his hunt to dwell on it. Clean up this mess, he ordered, gesturing to a few bloody footprints he'd tracked in, and bring me coffee, black. As he turned away, a wave of dizziness from blood loss and pain hit her. Her knees buckled. She stumbled, catching herself hard on the doorframe with her injured arm. A sharp, bitten-off gasp escaped her lips, the first sound she had ever made in his presence. Kalen spun around. You made a sound. You're hurt. He was beside her in an instant. His hand came up to steady her, his fingers closing directly over her bandaged wound. Celine cried out, a raw, high-pitched sound of pure agony. Kalen snatched his hand back. It was wet. He looked at his palm, now stained a bright, fresh red. He looked from his hand to her face, his gaze turning sharp and probing. You're bleeding. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She fumbled in her apron pocket, pulling out the small, blunt paring knife she used to peel roots. She mimed cutting herself, pointing frantically to her shoulder, then to the floor, acting out a slip and a fall onto the blade. A kitchen accident, a desperate, flimsy lie. Kalen stared at her, his intense gaze stripping her bare. For a moment, the obsessive hunger for the wolf faded, replaced by a cold, calculating focus. You cut your shoulder in the kitchen? Celine nodded, her heart hammering against her ribs. Let me see it, he commanded, his voice leaving no room for refusal. She shook her head violently, clutching her collar. I am your Alpha, he growled, low and dangerous. If a servant is injured under my roof, I see to it. Show me. He reached for her collar. Instinct, terror, and a wolf's defiance took over. Celine's hand flashed up, slapping his away. The sound was shockingly loud in the quiet hall. The guards at the far end stiffened. No one touched the Alpha. No one. Kalen looked at his hand, then back at her. He wasn't angry. He looked intrigued. You have fire in you, he murmured, almost to himself. Strange for a silent little mouse. He took a deliberate step back. Go to the healer. Get that stitched. I can't have you bleeding on my stones. He dismissed her with a flick of his wrist. Celine fled, holding her shoulder, feeling the weight of his burning gaze on her back until she turned the corner, out of sight. 2 days later, the fragile peace shattered. The adrenaline from the attack had worn off, and Kalen's curse descended with a vengeance. He hadn't slept since the night the white wolf saved him. The hallucinations were creeping back. Celine was dusting the library when she found him. He was curled in the corner behind an overturned chair, having torn down the heavy velvet drapes to block the light. He was rocking slowly, whispering to the empty air. They're screaming, he rasped, his voice frayed. The faces in the stone. Why won't they stop screaming? Her heart broke for him. She looked at the door. The guards were posted outside, but none would dare enter when he was like this. She was alone with him, with the man who was both her mate and her hunter. She set down her duster and walked over. Kneeling, she ignored the throb in her shoulder and reached out, placing her hand lightly on his knee. Kalen flinched violently, a snarl tearing from his throat, his hand flying to his belt for a weapon that wasn't there. When his bloodshot eyes focused and saw it was her, the mute, quiet maid, the aggression bled away into confusion. You, he croaked, the quiet one. He gripped her wrist, his skin fever-hot. Can you hear them? The voices? She shook her head slowly. She turned his hand over, and with her fingertip, she traced a single word on his palm. Peace. She couldn't use her voice, so she used her will. Carefully, delicately, she pushed her calming aura outward, weaving it around him like a blanket. It was a risk. If she pushed too hard, he might sense the wolf beneath the human magic, but she couldn't leave him like this. Kalen let out a long, shuddering sigh. His entire body slumped. "It stopped," he whispered, awe in his broken voice. "When you touch me, the noise just stops." He pulled her closer, his grip desperate. "Stay. Just sit. Don't move." So Celine sat on the cold floor. Kalen, the feared alpha of the Onyx Citadel, laid his head in her lap. It was scandalous. If Hilda found them, Celine would be cast out. If Rylan found them, she might be killed for presumption. But she stayed. She gently carted her fingers through his thick, dark hair, massaging his temples. He sighed, nuzzling unconsciously against her. "You smell like her," he mumbled, his words slurred with exhaustion. "The ghost wolf. She smelled like a clean winter rain." His eyes drifted shut. "Are you her?" The question was sleepy, delirious. "Are you my ghost?" Celine froze, her hand stilling in his hair. She didn't dare answer. She just kept stroking, pouring silent comfort into him until his breathing evened out into the deep, rhythmic pattern of true sleep. For the first time in weeks, he slept without nightmares. She watched him, tears pricking her eyes. In sleep, he wasn't the cursed alpha. He was just a man, unbearably weary. "I am yours," she thought, the words a silent vow in her mind. "I always have been." The peace lasted an hour. Then the door slammed open. Beta Rylan marched in, his face set in his usual grim lines. He stopped dead, his eyes widening at the sight before him, the alpha asleep with his head in the lap of a lowly scullery maid. "What is the meaning of this?" Rylan hissed, his voice cold with disapproval. Kalen awoke instantly, violence flooding back into his eyes. In one fluid motion, he was sitting up, placing his body between Celine and his beta. "Lower your voice," Kalen snarled, the command vibrating with alpha power. "She is a servant," Rylan argued, though he took a subconscious step back. "This is highly inappropriate. The Western clan leaders are here, demanding answers about the assassination attempt. You need to be in the war room, not consorting with the help." Kalen ran a hand over his face, the exhaustion battling with duty. "Get out, Rylan. I'll be there in 5 minutes." When the beta left, shooting a last suspicious glance at Celine, Kalen turned to her. He looked conflicted, wary. "You help me," he said, his voice low. "I don't understand it, but you do. I can't function like this. I need you close." He went to his desk, scribbled on a piece of parchment, and thrust it at her. "This is an order. You are now my personal attendant. You will move your things to the chamber adjacent to mine. You go where I go." Celine's eyes widened in genuine alarm. That was too close, far too dangerous. "Do not argue," he said, his gaze brooking no argument. "I cannot lead if I am lost to the noise. And you—" He looked at her, and for a flicker, the madness cleared, showing the stark, honest need beneath. "You are the only thing that works. I swear to you, on my honor, I will not harm you. I need the quiet." So Celine moved into the gilded cage of the Alpha's wing. She became his silent shadow. She sat in the corner during tense war councils, pouring wine, remaining still, while her mere presence kept the snarling beast of his curse at bay. She watched him rule, issuing commands with sharp intelligence, negotiating with a cunning that belied his fractured mind, protecting his people with a ferocity that was deeply ingrained. And, against all reason, she fell in love, not with the legend or the mad king, but with the man beneath, the leader who hated the violence but embraced it for his pack's safety, the soul who missed the white wolf not as a cure, but as a missing piece. Every night, he would stand on his balcony staring at the moonlit forest. "Where are you?" he would whisper, and the longing in his voice shattered her heart anew. "I'm right here," she would scream inside her mind. Then the letter arrived. Rylan brought it, his expression grim. It's from the seer of the Whispering Crags. Kalen tore the seal. As he read, the color drained from his face. The parchment fluttered from his fingers onto the desk. She says, Kalen's voice was hollow, the White Wolf is not a savior. She is the source of the curse, a demon sent to fray my mind, to make me dependent. She says the only way to break the sleeplessness is to kill the wolf, to cut out its heart. Celine, organizing books on the shelf, felt the world drop out of under her. The book in her hands fell to the floor with a thud. No, Kalen said, but the word lacked conviction. It was a reflex. Or she has bewitched you, Rylan countered with cold logic. Think, Alpha. You only find peace when she is near. She is feeding on your weakness. The seer is never wrong. The Pack Council has seen the letter. They are organizing a grand hunt. With or without you, they will kill the beast. They believe it is the only way to save their king. Kalen sank into his chair, defeated. They're going to kill her, he whispered, not looking at Celine, staring through her at a terrible future. They're going to kill the only thing that has ever given me peace. Celine stood frozen. The pack wasn't just hunting a myth anymore. They were hunting their Luna, convinced they were saving their Alpha. And Kalen, caught between his need and his duty to his people, couldn't stop them. She had to run. Tonight. But as she turned to leave, Kalen caught her hand. His grip was weak, pleading. Stay, he whispered, his voice raw. Just for tonight. I don't want to be alone while they plan to hunt her. He pulled her to him, burying his face in her apron. She felt the hot dampness of tears against the rough fabric. Hold me, he begged, the mighty Alpha reduced to a shattered man. Please. Celine wrapped her arms around him, feeling his silent tears. He was mourning the wolf he thought he had to sacrifice. Her mind screamed at her to flee, but her heart, bound irrevocably to his, refused. I can't leave him like this, she thought, her own resolve crumbling. She would stay one last night. She would give him this final piece of peace. And then, before the sun rose, the ghost wolf would vanish forever. The fire had burned down to embers, painting the Alpha's chamber in shades of blood and shadow. Kalen slept, his head a heavy, trusting weight on Celine's lap. She had not moved for hours. Her legs were numb, her shoulder ached, but she didn't care. This was the last time. The last time she would feel the warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breath, the solid reality of her mate. His hand was loosely curled around hers. Even in sleep, he held on. She brushed a strand of dark hair from his damp forehead. I'm sorry, she thought, the words a silent storm in her chest. I wanted to tell you. I wanted to be the queen you could lean on, not the ghost you have to hunt. He stirred, nuzzling into her palm without waking. Safe, he mumbled, the words slurred with sleep. You keep me safe. A single tear traced a hot path down Celine's cheek. He didn't mean the wolf, he meant her, the quiet servant. He had, in his broken way, come to need the silent comfort she offered, just as he yearned for the wolf's fierce protection. He loved both halves of her soul, and he didn't know they were one. And he never would. Because if he discovered the truth now, with the seer's poison in his ears and his pack baying for blood, he would have no choice. He would have to hate her. With infinite care, she pried her hand from his. He made a soft, distressed sound, his brow furrowing as the contact broke. Shh, she soothed, pushing one last gentle wave of calm over him. Sleep, Kalen, just sleep. He settled, his face relaxing once more. Celine stood, her stiff joints protesting. She looked down at him, memorizing the strong line of his jaw, the faint scar above his lip, the way his lashes lay dark against his skin. She imprinted it on her soul. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving her heart on the rug beside him. The citadel was quiet, but it was the quiet of a held breath. Tension thickened the air. Rylan had been busy. Guards were doubled at every post. They were preparing for the hunt at first light. Celine moved like the ghosts she was named for, slipping through the familiar shadows of the servants' passages. She wore her sturdiest dress and a stolen pair of men's wool trousers beneath it. She took nothing from her new chamber, no trinkets, no reminders, just herself. She reached the scullery's side door, the one with the rusted bolts the guards always forgot. She eased it open. The storm had returned. Wind roared, driving snow in stinging horizontal sheets. A whiteout, perfect cover. She plunged into the blizzard. The snow was knee-deep, dragging at her legs. She fought her way toward the black line of the forest, 100 yards of exposed mountainside. The wind tried to steal her breath, her courage. Just reach the trees, shift, run, never look back. She stumbled into the shelter of the ancient, snow-laden pines. The wind's scream became a mournful groan in the branches above. She leaned against a rough trunk, gasping, her lungs burning with cold. I made it, she thought, the relief so profound it felt like a new kind of pain. I'm free. Crack. The sound of a branch snapping underfoot, too deliberate to be the wind. Celine spun. 10 feet away, standing as if he were part of the tree shadows, was Beta Rylan. He was wrapped in a thick fur cloak, and in his hand was not a standard spear, but a long, cruel-looking hunting glaive, its tip polished to a wicked silver point. He wasn't surprised. He had been waiting. I knew it, Rylan said, his voice calm, cutting cleanly through the wind's howl. I've watched you, the way the Alpha's madness recedes when you're in the room, the way you're always absent when the wolf appears. It's not a spirit. It's not a coincidence. He leveled the glaive, the silver tip aimed at her heart. You are the ghost wolf. I knew it, Rylan said, his voice calm, cutting cleanly through the wind's howl. I knew it. I knew there was something wrong about you. Celine took a step back, her hands coming up in a placating gesture. She pointed to her throat, her face a mask of mute confusion. Drop the act, he spat, taking a step forward. I've watched you. The way the Alpha's madness recedes when you're in the room, the way you're always absent when the wolf appears. It's not a spirit. It's not a coincidence. He leveled the glaive, the silver tip aimed at her heart. You are the ghost wolf. No, Celine mouthed desperately, shaking her head. I saved him. You bewitched him, Rylan roared. You made him weak, dependent on a monster, and now I'm going to cut the sickness out of this pack. He lunged. The glaive shot forward, a silver streak in the gloom. Celine didn't think. She threw herself sideways into the snow. The blade whistled past, slicing through her cloak and scoring a line of fire across her arm. Shift, Rylan commanded, his eyes blazing. Show me the beast. Show the pack what they're really hunting. He put 2 fingers to his lips and let out a sharp, piercing whistle that tore through the storm. From between the trees all around them, pairs of yellow eyes ignited. Low growls rumbled through the clearing. The hunting party. He hadn't come alone. He had brought a dozen of the pack's best warriors. They weren't chasing a myth anymore. They had her cornered. Celine scrambled to her feet. She couldn't fight them as a human. She would be dead in seconds. She looked back toward the citadel, its lights faint and distant in the swirling snow. The bond in her chest, that fragile silver thread, pulled taut with a final agonizing pang. Forgive me, she thought, not to Kaelin, but to the universe. And then she stopped holding back. She let the beast out. The transformation was not graceful. It was a violent eruption of power held in check for a lifetime. Cloth shredded, bones realigned with audible cracks. A blinding flash of white light illuminated the clearing for a searing second. And then the ghost wolf stood before them. She was colossal, her white fur glowing against the dark pines, her eyes burning silver coals. She threw back her head and roared, a sound of primordial fury and devastating loss that shook snow from the branches and echoed off the mountain itself. The forest clearing became a whirlwind of fur, fangs, and flashing silver. Celine fought with the desperate fury of a creature cornered. She was larger, stronger than the pack wolves, but there were 12 of them, and Rylan with his silver-tipped glaive. They were fresh, fueled by righteous conviction. She was already wounded, her strength depleted from weeks of secretly soothing Kaelin's curse. She moved like liquid moonlight, a blur of white. She tossed a gray wolf into a tree trunk with a sickening thud. She whirled, her jaws snapping shut on the leg of another, flinging him yelping into the snow. But for every one she repelled, two more darted in, teeth scoring her flanks, her haunches. Her pristine white fur was soon streaked and matted with crimson. She was a spectacle of terrifying beauty and brutal efficiency, but she was tiring. The wound on her shoulder from the crossbow bolt, never fully healed, screamed in protest. Rylan watched from the edge, his glaive ready, waiting for an opening. "Now!" he bellowed. 3 wolves attacked in unison. One clamped onto her hind leg, another sank its teeth into the muscle of her already injured shoulder. The weight and pain dragged her down. Her forelegs buckled, and she crashed into the snow, a mountain of white fur pinned under a writhing mass of gray and brown. Rylan stepped forward, his face grim with purpose. He raised the glaive high, aiming for the vulnerable spot between her shoulder blades. "For the king!" he cried. "Stop!" The voice was human, raw with fury, but it carried the weight of 1,000 avalanches. Kaelin exploded into the clearing. He was barefoot, shirtless in the blizzard, his black hair whipping around a face contorted with a rage so pure it looked like madness. In his hand was his broadsword, gleaming dully in the stormlight. "Alpha!" Rylan shouted, not lowering the glaive. "Stay back! We have it! The demon is trapped!" Kaelin ignored him. His eyes were locked on the white wolf, penned and bleeding in the snow. Her silver eyes met his, and in them he didn't see a demon. He saw pain and defiance and a heart-breaking weariness. "Let her go," Kaelin commanded, his voice a low, deadly vibration. "I said, let her go." "It's killing you," Rylan screamed, desperation cracking his composure. "Look at yourself. You're bewitched. This beast is the source. The seer said—" "If you kill her," Kaelin interrupted, taking a step that placed him directly between Rylan and the wolf, "you kill your alpha." He raised his sword, not toward the pack, but in a barrier. "She is my mate." The words landed in the clearing like a physical shock. The pack wolves holding Celine down faltered, their growls dying. Attacking the alpha's mate was the highest treason. Their eyes flicked from the raging Kaelin to the uncertain Rylan. "It's a glamour," Rylan insisted, his knuckles white on the glaive. "It's a trick. Look at its eyes, Kaelin. That is a monster, not a mate." He lunged, not at Kaelin, but past him, the glaive driving downward toward Celine's heart. Kaelin woofed. He didn't parry with his sword. His left hand shot out and caught the wooden shaft of the glaive just below the silver head. The edge sliced deep into his palm. Blood welled, hot and immediate. But his grip was iron. He yanked, pulling Rylan off balance, and drove his right fist into the beta's face. The crack of bone was loud. Rylan dropped like a stone, the glaive falling from his nerveless fingers. Kaelin stood over him, blood dripping from his clenched fist, his chest heaving. The dominance rolling off him was a crushing, suffocating wave. He turned his burning gaze on the rest of the pack. "Submit." The command was absolute. The pack wolves whimpered, releasing Celine and dropping instantly to their bellies in the snow, ears flattened, tails tucked. Kaelin didn't spare them another glance. He turned to the white wolf. She was struggling to rise, bleeding from a dozen wounds, her breath coming in ragged, wet gasps. The fury bled from his eyes, replaced with a fear so profound it shook him. "It's okay," he whispered, dropping his sword into the snow. He took a step closer, reaching out a trembling, bloody hand. "I've got you. I'm here." But Celine was past reason. She was hurt, trapped, and her last secret was about to be torn from her. The pain and the panic were too much. She couldn't hold the shift. Her control shattered. A white light, softer this time, pulsed around her. Her form began to shimmer, to shrink. "No," Kaelin whispered, taking another step, his hand still outstretched. "Don't go. Please, don't disappear." The light flared once, brightly, and then faded. And there, curled in the bloody, churned snow, shivering in the tattered remains of a servant's dress, was Celine, the mute scullery maid, the girl he had called furniture, the woman who had held him while he slept. The world held its breath. The wind seemed to die mid-scream. Even the swirling snowflakes hung suspended in the air. Kalen stared, his mind unable to process the scene before him. There, crumpled in the blood-stained snow, was not the magnificent, mythical ghost wolf. It was the girl, the silent, gray-eyed girl who dusted his shelves and brought him tea. Her name surfaced from the depths of his memory, a fragile, forgotten thing, Celine. She looked up at him, tears carving clean tracks through the grime and blood on her face. And then she spoke. Her voice was a raw, husky whisper, scratched from disuse, but it was the most devastatingly beautiful sound he had ever heard. "I'm sorry," she croaked, the words full of a bone-deep weariness. "I'm so sorry, Kalen." The sound of his name on her lips, so intimate, so real, shattered his last vestige of understanding. Behind them, Bader Rylan pushed himself up on one elbow, spitting a mouthful of blood into the snow. "The mute! She speaks! By the moon, she's the wolf! She deceived us all!" Kalen ignored him. He was wading through a dream, the ground unsteady beneath his bare feet. He took a step, then another, closing the distance. "You," he breathed, the word a puff of fog in the cold. "You were here the entire time." His mind flashed with fractured images, her quiet presence in his study, the unusual calm that settled over him when she was near, the way the relentless noise in his head had begun to recede, not after a hunt, but after she'd been assigned to his wing. Celine's body shook with violent tremors from cold, shock, and blood loss. "I had to hide," she sobbed, the confession tumbling out between chattering teeth. "I'm a white wolf, an omen of death. My own pack tried to drown me when I was a pup. I've been running since I was 12. I thought you would kill me too. The cursed king killing a cursed beast? It seemed fitting." "Kill you?" The words were a blasphemy. Kalen dropped to his knees in the snow, the cold barely registering. He reached out a trembling, bloodied hand and cupped her icy cheek. "You saved me. In the haunted hallway? In my own bedchamber? You took a crossbow bolt meant for my heart." Her storm-gray eyes, so full of intelligence and pain, held his. "Because I'm your mate," she whispered, the truth leaving her in a final, exhausted rush. "I felt it the moment I scented you on the mountain wind. But you were a king drowning in madness, and I was a ghost nobody wanted. I was nobody." "You were never nobody." The denial was fierce, absolute, a vow forged in the crucible of his shock. Gently, he gathered her into his arms, cradling her broken, shivering form against his bare, blood-streaked chest, trying to pour his waning warmth into her. "You were everything. You were the silence and the ceaseless noise, the anchor in my storm." He lifted his gaze from her pale face to the scene around them, to Rylan, to the pack wolves still prostrate in the snow. His expression hardened into a mask of such cold, unforgiving fury that the very air seemed to frost. "Get the healer," he commanded, his voice a low, deadly whip-crack. "Now, if she dies from the wounds you inflicted this night, every single one of you will follow her into the dark. Do you understand me?" The pack scrambled. A young wolf took off at a dead sprint toward the citadel, his fear a sharp scent on the wind. Kalen gathered Celine up. She was frighteningly light, a bundle of bones and rags. He held her close, tucking her head under his chin, trying to shield her from the biting wind. "Stay with me," he murmured, into her damp silver-streaked hair, the plea raw and desperate. "Do not dare leave me now, not when I finally found you." Celine's head lolled against his shoulder, her strength utterly spent. The pull of unconsciousness was a deep, dark tide. "I'm so tired, Kaelin," she whispered, her breath a faint mist against his skin. "Then sleep," he commanded, his voice softening to a rough caress. "I will watch over you. I swear it. No one will ever harm you again, not while there is breath in my body." And with that, the Alpha King arose, his cursed madness gone, replaced by a single crystalline purpose. He turned his back on the bloody clearing, on the remnants of the hunt, and carried his most precious shattered treasure home through the storm. The wait was its own special kind of torment. Callan refused to leave the chamber, sitting rigidly in a chair pulled to the bedside, his bandaged hand forgotten. His entire world had contracted to the still, pale form of the woman in his bed, the legendary ghost wolf, his scullery maid, his mate. The healer, Alaric, a man as old and gnarled as the mountain roots, worked with a quiet, methodical efficiency, cleaning the vicious claw marks on her shoulder and arm, stitching the deepest gashes with hands steadier than his years would suggest. "She has lost a dangerous amount of blood, Alpha," Alaric finally said, his voice a dry rustle. He didn't look up from his work. "And she is severely malnourished. Hiding a nature of such potency, it consumes the body's resources like a forge fire burns coal. She has been starving herself for years to remain invisible." "Will she live?" Callan's voice was flat, stripped of all inflection, but his grip on the wooden arm of the chair was splintering the oak. Alaric paused, his wise, tired eyes lifting to meet the Alpha's. He saw not the mad king, but a man standing on a precipice, staring into an abyss of loss. "She is formidable. A white wolf is a rarity for a reason. They are reservoirs of a primal, resilient strength. Yes, Alpha, I believe she will live." He tied off a stitch with a neat knot. "But she needs profound rest, true safety, and," he added, his gaze sharpening, "she needs the bond. It is frayed, traumatized by revelation and violence. It must be consciously acknowledged, solidified by both of you. Without that anchor, her wolf will remain unsettled, and her recovery will be long and fraught." Callan gave a single, sharp nod. "Leave us." When the heavy door shut, the silence in the chamber was immense. Callan moved to the bed, the stone floor cold beneath his feet. He lay down beside her, careful not to jostle the bandages. He took her small, calloused hand, the hand that had scrubbed his floors, into his larger, wounded one. He brought her knuckles to his lips, pressing a kiss against the rough skin. "I was a blind fool," he whispered to her sleeping face, his breath stirring a strand of silver hair on her cheek. "I scaled mountains and scoured forests for a legend, and all the while the miracle was right here, polishing the dust from my life." He closed his eyes, and for the first time he stopped fighting the strange silver thread in his soul. He reached for it, embraced it. It was no longer a confusing, maddening whisper or the source of his obsessive hunt. It was a strong, humming chord of pure connection, thrumming with her faint, steady heartbeat. Her presence wasn't a cure for a curse. It was the missing half of his own spirit. The screaming noise in his mind was simply gone, not silenced by force, but quieted by completion. A peace deeper than any sleep washed over him. He slept, a dreamless, healing sleep, his forehead resting against her shoulder, their hands still entwined. Celine woke to a deep, pervasive ache and a warmth she hadn't known in a decade. She blinked open gritty eyes. The first thing she saw was Callan, awake, propped on one elbow beside her, simply watching her. The raging crimson madness was utterly absent from his amber eyes. In its place was a look of such wondering, profound tenderness it stole the air from her lungs. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with sleep and emotion. and you're staring," she rasped, her throat feeling scraped raw. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He reached for a carafe of water, poured a cup, and held it to her lips himself as she drank. "I missed your voice," he admitted quietly as she drank. "All those weeks I thought you had none. I didn't know it sounded like the first clear note after a storm." The simple care undid her. "I had to survive," she whispered, turning her head away from the cup when she'd had enough. "A mute servant is invisible. A white wolf is a target." "Not anymore." Callan sat up, the tenderness hardening into the unyielding resolve of a king. "I have decreed it. The white wolf is no longer an omen of death in the Onyx territories. She is the sigil of House Thorn, the protector of this realm. To harm her is to declare war on the throne itself. The law is carved in stone." Celine pushed herself up slightly, wincing at the pull on her stitches. "And Rylan? The pack, they saw a monster. They hunted their own Luna." "They saw a queen defending her mate," Callan corrected, his voice softening as he looked at her. "Rylan is in the dungeons. He awaits your judgment." "My judgment?" The concept was foreign, terrifying. "You are the queen," Callan said, as if stating a fundamental law of nature. "He raised a weapon against you. He caused you harm. His life is now yours to spare or to end. The choice and the justice are yours." Celine was silent for a long moment. She thought of Ryland's face in the clearing, not cruel, but fiercely, desperately loyal. He had believed he was saving his Alpha from a demon. "Let him go," she said finally. Callan's brow furrowed. "Celine, he put a silver glaive to your heart." "He was trying to save you from what he believed was a curse," she argued, her voice gaining strength. "He was wrong, but his loyalty was real, and we will need loyal wolves, wolves who can learn from their mistakes." She met his gaze, her stormy eyes serious. "And because the witch will return." Callan went very still. The air in the room chilled. Morgana. She didn't just cast a spell and walk away. Cells of such potency, they are living things. They have a tether. She fed on your agony, on the chaos. She'll feel the bond severing her connection. She'll feel your newfound peace. She'll come to see what stole her favorite toy. Celine's prediction was a dark prophecy fulfilled. 3 days later, the sky over the Onyx Citadel did not promise a storm, it became a perversion of one. The firmament turned a sickly, bruised violet, leaching the color from the snow below. The wind died, leaving an oppressive, thick silence that smelled of ozone and rotting lilies. A profound wrongness settled over the mountain, a pressure in the ears and a chill in the soul. The guards on the battlements did not shout an alarm for an army. Their voices were hushed, tinged with a superstitious dread as they pointed. A single figure walked, unhurried and unhindered, up the winding road from the valley. The blizzard's remnants did not touch her. The wind did not stir a strand of her ink-black hair. Callan stood on the ramparts, Celine at his side. She was dressed in practical wool, her arms still bound, but she stood straight, her gaze clear and unflinching. The bond between them hummed quietly, a steady counterpoint to the gathering wrongness. "It's her," Callan growled, his hand instinctively finding the pommel of his sword. The memory of sleepless torment was a fresh scar. "Morgana." The witch stopped just beyond the effective range of the Citadel's ballistae. She was beautiful in the way a sharpened dagger is beautiful, all cold, deadly lines. Her eyes glowed with a venomous, unnatural green. Her voice, when it came, was amplified, slithering around the stone battlements as if carried by the corrupted air itself. "I felt a disturbance in my web," she called, her tone mockingly sweet. "My favorite little puppet has stopped his delightful screaming. I came to see what blunt instrument has broken my most intricate toy." "Your hold is broken, witch," Callan roared back, his alpha power lending his voice a physical weight that cracked against hers. "You have no power here. Leave this place." Morgana's laughter was the sound of shattering crystal. "Broken? By what? A stronger sleeping draft? A luckier star?" Her glowing green gaze drifted up the wall, past Kaelin, and landed unerringly on Celine. She paused, her head tilting with avian curiosity. "Oh, I see. You found a new pet to quiet your mind." Her lips curled into a cruel smirk. "She's not a pet," Kaelin snarled, stepping slightly in front of Celine. "She is my mate." "A mate?" Morgana sneered, the word dripping with contempt. "You, the broken king? Who would ever chain themselves to such a fractured, screaming thing?" She raised a pale, elegant hand. Sickly green fire, crackling with chaotic energy, ignited around her fingers. "No matter. I'll just remove the distraction, and you'll revert. It was so much more entertaining that way." She flicked her wrist. The ball of emerald fire screamed across the distance, not like an arrow, but like a living, hateful thing, aimed unerringly for Celine's heart. Kaelin moved to shove her behind a stone merlon, but Celine was faster. She didn't need to shift. She didn't need a weapon. She simply stepped forward, raising her good hand, palm out. Silence. This was not the gentle calm she used to soothe Kaelin. This was the core of her nature, the absolute truth of the ghost wolf. She did not create or destroy magic. She imposed balance. She was the void that consumed chaos. A pulse of pure, soundless white energy erupted from her palm. It was not a blast, but a wave of neutralizing stillness. It met the shrieking green fire in midair. There was no cataclysmic explosion. The chaotic magic simply unraveled. It frayed at the edges, dissolved into harmless, fading sparks that winked out before they could touch the snow-dusted stones of the Citadel wall. Morgana gasped, stumbling back a physical step, her smug certainty on her face shattered. "What? What are you?" "I am the ghost wolf," Celine called down, her voice clear and steady, carrying without artifice or amplification. It was the voice of a queen stating a fact. "I am the stillness that ends the storm. Your curses have no purchase here. Your chaos has no home." "Impossible!" Morgana shrieked, her composure evaporating into raw, spiteful fury. She threw both hands forward, drawing not from within, but from the corrupted air around her. A vortex of dark energy began to form, a whirlwind of black ice and shrieking malice, pulling the very light from the area. Celine didn't flinch. She planted her feet. She focused her will not on the witch, but on the space between them. She imagined a wall of pure, absolute neutrality expanding from the Citadel's foundations. It was not an attack, but a cancellation. The wave of white stillness hit the forming vortex. The shrieking wind died. The black ice fell as harmless snow. The spell smothered in its infancy. The neutralizing field didn't stop there. It washed over Morgana herself. The witch cried out, a sound of genuine panic. She clawed at her own throat as the field severed her connection to the ley lines, to the dark energies she wielded. The green fire in her eyes guttered and died, leaving only wide, mortal brown eyes flooded with terror. She was just a woman on a frozen road, utterly powerless. Kaelin didn't wait. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator finally unleashed. He vaulted over the battlement, shifting in a blur of motion that was both beautiful and terrifying. The massive black wolf, a shadow given flesh and fury, landed before the cowering witch with a ground-shattering impact that sent cracks through the icy road. He didn't kill her. He loomed over her, his jaws a breath from her face, a continuous, rumbling growl vibrating from his chest, a promise of evisceration, of bones crushed to powder. He held her there, trapped in the circle of his rage and her own utter helplessness, until she was sobbing incoherently, reduced to a pitiful, trembling creature in the dirt. Then he shifted back, standing tall and unclothed before her, a king pronouncing sentence. "You are banished," he declared, his voice the finality of a falling mountain. "If you ever set foot in the Frostfang Range again, my mate won't just silence your pathetic magic, she will unmake the very essence of what you are. Now crawl out of my sight." Morgana scrambled to her feet, stumbled, fell, and crawled, her fine robes tearing on the ice, her terrified whimpers fading into the vast, silent white of the mountains. The ancient enemy was gone, not slain by greater violence, but undone by a more powerful truth. The citadel, which had watched in breathless silence, erupted not in a war cry, but in a single, unified, triumphant howl that shook the lingering violet from the sky. The echo of the citadel's triumphant howl faded, leaving a profound silence in its wake. It was not the oppressive quiet of Morgana's approach, but the deep, ringing stillness of a bell after its final peal. Kalen stood on the road, watching the witch's pitiful retreat until she vanished into the gray-white haze of the distant pass. The cold bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. The fury that had carried him over the wall was receding, leaving behind a vast, unfamiliar emptiness, an emptiness waiting to be filled. He turned and looked up at the ramparts. Celine stood there, her hand still slightly raised, her silver-streaked hair a stark banner against the dark stone. She was not smiling in victory. Her expression was one of solemn exhaustion, of a monumental task completed. Their eyes met across the distance, and the silver thread between them pulled taut, humming with a resonance that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with home. He shifted and bounded back up the steep slope in a few powerful leaps, landing on the walkway beside her in human form. Without a word, he shrugged off of the heavy fur cloak a guard hastily offered and wrapped it around her shoulders, his hands lingering on her arms. "You are freezing," he murmured, his voice rough. "So are you," she whispered back, her gaze searching his face. The amber eyes that met hers held no trace of the crimson curse, only a clarity so sharp it was almost painful to behold. He didn't deny it. He simply pulled her gently against him, the cloak enveloping them both, sharing what warmth they had. The court and the guards discreetly turned away, melting back into their duties, leaving their king and their newly revealed queen alone in the aftermath. "It's over," he said into her hair, the words a question as much as a statement. "Her part is," Celine corrected softly, her cheek pressed against his chest. She could hear the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Ours is just beginning." He understood. The external enemy was vanquished, but the internal reconstruction of a pack, a kingdom, and 2 shattered souls lay ahead. That reconstruction began that evening, not in the grand hall, but in Kalen's private solar. A fire crackled in the hearth, and a simple meal was laid out. Celine sat on a thick rug before the fire, still too stiff to sit comfortably in a chair. Kalen sat beside her, his back against a heavy settle. "Tell me," he said, his voice low, "everything, from the beginning." And she did, haltingly at first. Then in a quiet, relentless stream, she spoke of her birth under a full moon, the white pelt that marked her as an omen. She spoke of the fear in her parents' eyes, the midnight journey to the icy river, the shock of the water, the desperate scramble to the bank. She spoke of years spent running, hiding her wolf, starving her nature to remain small and silent, finding precarious refuge as a nameless drudge in dozens of packs before fate led her to the Onyx Citadel. "I thought it was the last place anyone would look for a white wolf," she said, a faint, wry ghost of a smile touching her lips. "The court of the cursed king, a place of such loud madness, my small silence would be completely drowned." Kalen listened, his face a mask of grief and fury for the child she had been. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, staring into the flames. "I hunted the ghost wolf for peace," he finally said. You became a ghost just to survive. He turned to her, taking her hand. Never again. Your wolf will never be starved or hidden, not from me and not from this pack. They fear me, she stated, a simple fact. They feared a legend, he countered. Now they will know their queen. They saw you defend them today, not with brute force, but with a strength they cannot comprehend. That will breed a deeper loyalty than fear ever could. He reached for a dagger at his belt, not a weapon of war, but an eating knife with the hilt of dark antler. With a deliberate, solemn motion, he cut a shallow line across his own palm. Then, with infinite care, he did the same to hers. He clasped their hands together, their bonds singing at the direct contact. By blood and by bond, before the moon and this fire, I swear it, he vowed, his eyes holding hers. You are my equal, my anchor and my queen. This kingdom, this pack, my life, they are yours. Celine's storm-gray eyes filled with tears that did not fall. She squeezed his hand. And I am yours, she whispered, the promise settling into her bones, truer than any hidden identity had ever been. For the first time in both of their lives, it was enough. The great hall of the Onyx Citadel, once a place of grim feasts and tense councils under the shadow of the curse, was transformed. Evergreen boughs hung from the rafters, and hundreds of tallow candles fought back the perpetual winter gloom, their light reflecting off the polished stone and ice that sheened the high windows. The entire pack was assembled, from the highest-ranking warriors to the lowliest kitchen scullions. A palpable current of anxiety and awe thrummed in the air. At the far end, on the dais where Kaelin had often sat alone in brooding silence, 2 thrones now stood, his of carved black basalt, and beside it a new one, fashioned not in days, but in the 3 weeks since the witch's banishment. It was a masterpiece of stark beauty. The bleached, arcing ribs of a great mountain elk formed the back and arms, woven with living strands of silver-threaded ivy and padded with thick white wolf pelts, not from her kin, but from winter wolves, a symbol of dominion, not sacrifice. Celine stood in an antechamber, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She wore a gown the color of winter twilight, simple in cut, but exquisitely crafted, with a high collar and long sleeves that hid the fading scars on her arm. Her silver-streaked hair was braided in a complex crown, held by pins of polished bone. She looked every inch a queen, but inside she felt like the scullery maid about to be exposed. The doors opened. Kaelin stood there, resplendent in black and silver, his crown of iron and obsidian upon his brow. He offered his arm. His eyes, clear and steady, held no trace of doubt. Ready? I'm not, she admitted honestly. His smile was a small, private thing. Neither am I. We'll be uncertain together. He leaned closer. They are not your judges, Celine. They are your people, and they are terrified of disappointing you. The perspective was so foreign it stole her breath. She took his arm. A herald's voice boomed as they entered. All hail Alpha Kaelin, king of the Onyx territories. All hail Luna Celine, the ghost wolf, queen of the Frostfang range. The pack knelt. The sound of 1,000 knees hitting stone was a thunderous wave. As they processed down the aisle, Celine kept her gaze fixed ahead, but she could feel the weight of their stares, curious, wary, reverent. They reached the dais. Instead of leading her directly to the throne, Kaelin turned to face the assembly, drawing her to stand beside him. For years, his voice, powered by his alpha will, filled every corner of the vast hall. This pack has known only 2 states, the hunt and the haunted silence between screams. We were a kingdom defined by a curse. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the bowed heads. That curse is broken, not by a warrior's blade, but by a queen's courage. She walked among you unseen, bearing a burden that would have broken any other. She saved your king, not with force, but with fidelity. She defended these walls not with chaos, but with clarity. He turned to Celine, taking both her hands in his. You know her as the silent girl, the ghost wolf, my mate. He raised his voice again, a declaration that brooked no argument. Now you will know her as your Luna, your queen. Her word is my word. Her safety is your paramount duty. Her strength is the foundation of our new peace. He released one hand and gestured. An elder, the keeper of pack lore, approached bearing a cushion. On it lay not a crown of metal, but a delicate circlet. It was made from the same bleached bone as her throne, intertwined with strands of shimmering silver and a single perfect moonstone that rested in the center of the forehead. A crown of bone, Kaelin said, lifting it, for the survival that forged you. Bound with silver for the bond that anchors us, centered with the moon's light for the truth of your nature. With solemn grace, he placed it upon her brow. It was lighter than she expected. It felt not like a weight, but like a completion. Rise, Celine said. The word was quiet, but it carried, clear as a bell in the hushed hall. Look upon your king, and look upon your queen. The pack rose. The silence stretched for a heartbeat, 2. Then Beta Rylan, freshly restored to his position by Celine's mercy, stepped forward. He placed a fist over his heart and bowed his head deeply, not just to Kaelin, but to her. My Alpha, my Luna, he intoned, his voice thick with emotion. One by one, then in groups, then as a roaring whole, the pack followed suit. The vow echoed through the hall, a seismic wave of acceptance. My Alpha, my Luna. The sound was not just heard, it was felt in the bond. It was a torrent of loyalty, hope, and nascent love that flowed into Celine, not as a crushing pressure, but as a river finding its true bed. Her knees nearly buckled, not from weakness, but from the sheer force of it. Kaelin's hand found the small of her back, steadying her. He led her to the twin thrones. As she sat on the bone and silver seat, looking out over her people, the last ghost within her finally, peacefully, laid itself to rest. Peace, Celine quickly learned, was not a passive state. It was a daily practice, a careful architecture of trust and new traditions. The Citadel, once a fortress braced against internal and external demons, began to breathe differently. Her first act as crowned queen was a small, quiet revolution. She claimed a derelict courtyard on the Citadel's south side, a wind-scoured pit of rock and stubborn ice that had been used as a midden heap. With Kaelin's amused support, she enlisted the help of anyone who was curious. Off-duty guards, kitchen staff, even the healer, Alaric's young apprentices. They hauled away refuse, they built sheltered beds from stacked stone. Using ancient techniques remembered by the oldest pack members, they constructed a cunning system of windbreaks and reflective surfaces to capture the weak winter sun. Into the hard-won earth, they planted not flowers, but useful, resilient things. Hardy medicinal herbs, cold-tolerant root vegetables, and, in the most sheltered corner, a single struggling row of berry canes wrapped in protective fleece. The pack watched, baffled. A queen who dug in the dirt? Yet they also saw their fierce alpha king often there beside her, moving stones with his bare hands, his brow furrowed in concentration rather than rage. They saw the slow, green defiance of life pushing through frozen ground. They called it, with a mix of humor and reverence, the Luna's folly. Celine felt the name in the bond and smiled. Let them think it folly. This was her answer to the sterility of her years in hiding. This was creation, however small, in the face of a world that had only ever demanded her disappearance. One crisp afternoon, as she was mulching the berry canes with straw, a shadow fell over the garden. She looked up to see Rylan standing stiffly at the arched entrance. "Luna," he said, his voice formal. "Beta," she replied, wiping her hands on her simple work dress. "The garden is open to all. You don't need to announce yourself." He hesitated, then stepped inside. He walked slowly along the narrow paths, his warrior's frame seeming too large for the space. He stopped before a bed of gray-green wintertime, its scent sharp in the cold air. "It smells alive," he said, the words awkward. "That's the idea," Celine said, coming to stand a few feet away. He didn't look at her. His gaze was fixed on the tiny leaves. "I owe you a debt I can never repay. My life, for one, but more than that, my understanding." He finally turned, and his eyes were full of a raw, unvarnished shame. "I saw a monster. I was wrong. I almost killed the best thing that has ever happened to this pack." Celine was silent for a moment. "You saw a legend made flesh, and you acted to protect your king. I cannot fault the loyalty, only the blindness. How do I fix it?" The question was a plea from a man built on certainty, now adrift. "You look," she said simply. "You learn to see what is, not what you fear. Start here." She plucked a sprig of thyme and held it out to him. "It's for stews and for calming a fever. It is both weapon and remedy, depending on the hand that holds it." Rylan, the hardened beta, took the sprig of thyme as if it were a sacred relic. He bowed, deeper than protocol demanded, and left the garden. That night, under a sky blazing with stars, a new sound joined the eternal wind of the Frostfang Range. It began as a single, clear, searching note from the highest tower. Kaelin, honoring an old tradition long abandoned during his madness, was howling to the moon. It was a howl not of rage or hunting lust, but of presence, of a king, whole once more, claiming his realm in peace. A moment later, from the barracks, another howl rose to join his, Ryland's, strong and sure, layered with a new humility. Then another, and another. Guards on the wall, cooks in the kitchens, healers in the infirmary. Voices both wolf and human, woven to a complex, powerful chorus. Celine stood on the balcony of her new chambers, listening to the song of her pack. The bond was alive with it, a tapestry of interconnected souls. She tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and let her own howl rise. It was different from the others, not silver, but a pure white sound that seemed to weave through the other voices, binding them together, lending them a harmony and a stillness at their core. The howling garden thrived, and so, slowly, miraculously, did the pack. The deepest cold of the year began to relent. It was a subtle shift, a slight softening in the bite of the wind, a lengthening of the pale daylight, a persistent drip, drip, drip from the great icicles that fanged the citadel's eaves. The first true thaw was coming. For Kaelin and Celine, their own private thaw had been ongoing. Their bond, once a frayed and traumatized thread, was now a cable of adamant, humming with constant, quiet communion. They learned each other not as ruler and subject, nor as hunter and myth, but as partners. He learned her love of quiet mornings and the precise way she liked her tea. She learned the weight of the crown he bore and how to soothe the lingering ghosts of his torment with nothing more than her presence. One evening, they walked along the newly cleared battlements, looking out over the mountains, awash in the fiery gold of sunset. The snow below shone with a pink alpenglow. "The passes will be clear in a few weeks," Kaelin said, his arm around her shoulders. "Traders, emissaries, news from the wider world." "They will hear of the Ghost Wolf Queen," Celine said, a hint of her old wariness surfacing. "Let them," he said, his tone firm. "Let them hear that the cursed king is cursed no more, and that his queen's howl silences storms. It will make for a more interesting reputation than madman in a mountain keep." He paused, looking down at her. "There's something I wish to do before the world arrives at our gates." "What?" "Run with you," he said simply. "Not as king and queen, not as hunter and prey, just as wolves, on our own terms, in our own territory." The desire echoed in the bond, pure and wild and free. Celine's wolf, so long suppressed, rose in eager answer. They left the citadel after dark, under a 3/4 moon. They shifted at the tree line, the transformation seamless. Kalen's wolf was a massive shadow, power condensed into sleek black fur and intelligent amber eyes. Celine's was a creature of moonlight and mist, her white pelt seeming to glow from within, her storm-gray eyes holding ancient wisdom. For a moment, they stood side by side, sniffing the cold, pine-scented air. Then, with a shared, wordless impulse, they ran. It was an explosion of pure, joyous freedom. They streamed through the ancient pines, a shadow and a phantom, their paws silent on the needle-strewn ground. They raced up wind-scoured ridges, sending showers of gravel skittering down slopes. They plunged through drifts of crystalline snow, emerging in clouds of diamond dust. Kalen chased her, and she let him, her white form flickering between the trees like a will-o'-the-wisp. Then she chased him, her speed breathtaking, a force of nature given graceful form. They were not running from anything. They were running for the sheer delirious joy of it, for the strength in their bodies, and the perfect understanding in their bond. They finally came to a stop on a high, flat promontory overlooking the sleeping valley. The citadel was a distant, dark jewel below. They shifted back, laughing and breathless, their skin steaming in the frigid air. Kalen pulled her into his arms, both for warmth and for the simple need to hold her. "Look," Celine whispered, pointing east. On the far horizon, where the mountains kissed the sky, the first faint hint of greenish-gray was lightening the black. Dawn was hours away, but the promise was there. The long night was ending. "The first thaw," Kalen murmured, his lips against her temple. "A new season." Celine leaned into him, watching the faint light grow. The ghosts of her past were silent. The curse was a forgotten nightmare. The witch was a banished memory. Before them lay not a path of survival, but a kingdom to build, a life to share. "Our season," she corrected softly. And as the first true edge of dawn began to bleed color into the world, the Alpha King and the Ghost Wolf Queen stood together, no longer two fractured halves, but a complete and unbreakable whole, ready to meet whatever came next.